season dependent on what guys are wanting. Like I said, early season, they're using lightweight, 3/4, 3/8, small stuff, trying to get them as light as they can just to get a strike. And then as the season moves on, they'll up their weight.
It's time for a throwback episode. This one was from 2021, the first time that Ed Gobo, who ended up being a co-host for a time, came on to talk about Bucktails 101. This is a good episode that really should be out there, so I'm re-uploading it back to the platform. Keep in mind, this was 2021. Weren't really good at this thing back then, but all the production issues aside, it's an informative episode and should be pretty enjoyable.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fat Dad Fishing Stream. My name is Rich, and I am the resident original Fat Dad for Fat Dad Fishing. Tonight is going to be an awesome stream. We're going to be talking about one of the oldest, more traditional lures out there. One of the lures that you can pretty much catch anything on, and that is a bucktail. So tonight I am being joined by Ed, the owner of Captain Hank's Tackle. Ed, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Rich. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for agreeing to spend some time with us tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm pretty excited about this conversation. So before we get started, really going into bucktails and everything like that, why don't you give everyone just an overview of you, what kind of fishing do you do, and a little bit about how Captain Hank's got started.
So, like most people, I started fishing with my dad at a young age. Mostly freshwater. He used to dabble in saltwater stuff. Recently, we're both getting into it a lot more, and it's mostly back-based stuff, fluke, striper, occasional weak fish when we can find them, stuff like that. Captain Hank's actually kind of started as a little bit of a joke. It was a business, born of COVID. Me and a good friend were, looking around, and we do a lot of fishing together still. And we just got tired of buying stuff that didn't really perform. A lot of the big name stuff, you do one drift and there's no paint left. So we decided to start that, and here we are today, trying to make the best product we can.
Yeah, and I think that's a story that we're hearing more and more often, right? A lot of businesses born of the COVID and the pandemic and everything like that. Andrew, hello, Andrew. Andrew's in the chat right now. Yeah, as we jump into this, let me just say real quick, for those that are on the live stream, if you have any questions, any feedback, anything you want to talk about, put it right in the live chat. And for those that are watching the replay later, put them in the comments. I go through and answer every single comment on all of the videos, and I would have a direct line to Ed. So if you have questions specifically for him, I'm happy to reach out, and he'll be happy to pass an answer back through me to you. We'll also go through Ed's contact information during this stream. So if you want to contact him directly and circumvent me, absolutely, you can do that as well. So I just wanted to start off with that. And Andrew, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. So let's kind of roll into a little bit about bucktails. I want to make sure that we talk about flounder and flounder jigs, because that is really the heart of what most of my subscribers really want to fish for. So let's talk a little bit about the bucktails for flounder. And as we roll into that, let's start off first of all by going into the different types of bucktails, the different types of variety that are out there, and what you typically use and why.
I mean, what's the word I'm trying to say? I mean, there's so many different styles and jig head types and colors, and it's a lot of personal preference. Like mine, I'll show you one. Like this year, this was my color. This was a teal, and it's got a teal belly with a chartreuse top. That was my go-to pattern. I think a lot of it has to do with confidence and what guys are doing well with. It's very, there's not a one size fits all. It's definitely very angler dependent, and even conditions. Certain colors are gonna show up better in dirtier water, clear water.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. A lot of people take the bucktail as, I don't think people realize the power of the bucktail, right? I mean, there are so many different kinds, and what I typically use is the ball jig, the ball head, which is more, it's the round head. right there. I typically use that, and it's more for, in my mind, it's the best for all around and specifically for vertical jigging. And it also works really well with casting out, but there are a lot of different types, and a lot of them you don't actually see so much in the mid-Atlantic to Northeast, like the skimmer or the flathead. I actually don't even have one that I can show anybody right now, but the skimmer is one that is typically used for fishing flats, really shallow water, and it's just a flat jig head with the bucktail on it, and it's really good for pulling it over the shallow water. The minnow head is a popular one because of spro. That's what a lot of people actually call them spro heads now, but it's the minnow head. It's another really good one for deep water jigging. I know you make those. Smiling bill, which is that's like the the original old man.
That's the quintessential like surf caster. Most guys, you see them, up in like Sandy Hook and on the beaches. That's what they're throwing. That's just the OG.
Huge in New York. For not just for flounder, but for striper. That to me is the go-to. And I don't know. I mean, it's really good for the surf. It's good for the deep retrieves. The way that it's set up, I just like the way it looks, and I get the hits. I think it has a little bit to do with the red mouth.
I think more so with the smiling bills. I think it's actually the V that's cut in the head of it. I think when the water hits it'll want to move, on your retrieve. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, maybe that's it. I what I should do is use it a little bit more on the kayak and on the boat, but I definitely use it in surf. Love it for striped bass. And then you have a whole bunch of other things. You have the wobble heads, you have the mushrooms, you got the bullets, the stand-ups, the footballs, all of those different ones. What are the ones that you specifically really focus on for your market right now? What's the most popular?
Right now, the most popular is actually, it's really not even a bucktail. It's more so just a standard ball jig. A lot of the offshore guys this time of year. I mean, now that the season's closed, a lot of guys start bucktail as light as they can inshore, in bays and stuff like that. And then as the fish move offshore, they start changing their patterns and what they're throwing. It's really, season dependent on what guys are wanting. Like I said, early season, they're using lightweight, 3/4, 3/8, small stuff, trying to get them as light as they can just to get a strike. And then, like I said, as the season moves on, they'll up their weight, they'll change colors. Like I said before, the watercolor clarity, it's got a lot to do with it.
Yeah, it's like in the spring, right? You got the small 3/8, maybe a ½ ounce in the back. You're putting the smallest, I don't even know what size they are. They 3-inch, 4-inch, the 4-inch gulp.
Yeah, little 4-inchers.
Yeah, little 4-inchers. And by the end of the season, you got a whole container of those things, and all you're throwing are 5 and 6 inches. For example, I was out yesterday actually trying to scare something up in the wind, going big and with the 6-inch on the back. And it's what they're looking for, right? And it's what we're looking for, because let's be honest, at the beginning of the season, most of us, myself included, you just want to go out, you want to get some tight lines, you want to get some fish on. But as the season goes on, you become less about numbers. They becomes less important. It's like, what? I want one fish and I want it to be a plus 25, right? Or something like that. And so you're looking for the bigger baits and the bigger fish that way. So we've got the different styles. Like I said, I use the round head, but there's also another part of the jig head itself, right? So the bucktail is broken down into different components. You've got the jig is the backbone of, well, really it's the head, the hook, right? And then
the hook is key.
Yeah, the hook is a big thing. And then you have the bucktail, which is what makes it a bucktail. And then you have the extras, right? But one thing that I have found interesting is people don't necessarily think about the angle of the hook eye or the jig eye on there. So, they're typically either 90 degrees or a 45 or a 60 degree. What are you seeing with that as far as what people are looking for?
It's angler dependent. The most common thing like we're doing is with the ball jigs. I have some right here. Of course, I didn't get the minnow head, but the angle of the hook eye and where it protrudes, in relation to the jig itself has a lot to do with how your jig is going to perform underwater. Now you got to remember we're on land, we're in air. This is there's really no forces acting on this. When it's underwater, you have currents, you have, fish, other fish, you have, things that are acting on it. My biggest thing is with the ball heads is the angle of the hook. So when your line is tied on, this will keep your jig, imagine my hand being the ground, it's keeping that, your line wants to be vertical. So it's trying to keep that hook point up. So when a fish comes in and it grabs it. With the minnow heads, of course I didn't bring one. There's 1,000 outside, but none in here. With the minnow heads, it actually, the weight of the jig head is actually further forward past the hook eye. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a nose heavy jig. It will help the hook to stand up, but it will also, hit the ground, and it will cause it to, want to rotate. And I found that since now, when I first started making jigs, I was a Spro guy. That's all I used before I really started, getting into it. And what I found switching to the ball head, it keeps the it's much cleaner. It doesn't pick up a lot of seaweed. It doesn't pick up a lot of trash. It's easier to shed, that stuff on the bottom, kind of swims through it a little bit better than versus that, weight forward of the minnow head.
Right. And I'll say I use Spro. I actually, for most of my life, used a custom bucktail that was made out of, God, I can't even remember the name, tackle shop in Cape May. Jim's Bait and Tackle. There were some custom ones down there. And I'm talking over 40 years, growing up, that's what we got. And then I was tying my own for a while, but I wasn't making the jigs, right? I was just using old bucktails that I got from Jim's, and they get beaten up because I used to go for bluefish mostly, and turn around and I would just tie them myself, to just put them in the fly tying vise and start tying them up. So I've done a lot of experimenting with that. But Spro, then I went to Spro because then I got lazy and I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I just went out and, start making a little bit of money after you're out of college. And now I'm buying tackle and I'm buying Spro. Actually, Spro came after that, but there were a couple other brands in there as well. I think it's a decent jig, but it's not, I use it as a backup, right? It's my emergency one if I'm out of everything else or if I'm losing everything. So for an example, just so people know, full disclosure, yesterday I was out fishing. I had picked up on Friday a whole bunch of new jigs here from Ed, and I lost 4. So I threw a Spro on and lost that. It was a bad day for me. And I would just say I was being followed by a seal. It is way too early in September to be followed by seals. That's usually a midwinter thing, but yeah, they were following me on the kayak. It was brutal, but yeah, so that's when I use a Spro, or if I'm on really heavy structure and I'm going to lose something, I don't want to necessarily lose all of my good jigs. If I'm really testing the heavy structure, like a wreck, right? I was going to do a tournament last weekend. It was canceled, and we were going to be hitting some wrecks. And I have a whole bunch of cheap jigs for on the wreck, and then to switch out to the better jigs alongside the wreck. So I'm not necessarily on that structure, but I use the minnows. The minnow heads are really good for wreck fishing, I think, because it's a more vertical presentation when you're vertical jigging. The key is you just have to keep a lot of weight on there so that you don't have any scope on that structure, so you can pull it straight up, straight down as you're going over it. But yeah, so, one thing about the angles that I think people should keep in mind is, and this is a difference between southern fishing, I'm talking southern, southeast United States, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, versus mid-Atlantic to northern. For flounder specifically, they're casting to get their flounder there. They're not vertical jigging like we are, because they're typically catching these things in less than 6 feet of water, often in a foot of water. So they're actually tossing it out, and they're using the skimmer heads. In that case, I think it's important for people to understand you should look for something that has that hook further forward, right? You want that angle so it pulls it straighter through the water. If you use a Spro minnow head as an example, because that's what people are going to be familiar with, and you're casting that, it is not going to retrieve as well. You don't want to necessarily troll with that either. Now, some of them you'll see will actually have 2 eyes on it, right? So you have the one up here, and then you have one up front. If you're going to be casting it out and retrieving it, use the one out front so it pulls it flatter in the water across. If you're going to be jigging it, then you use this one right here, and that'll be pulling it this way. So it gives you this more action in this direction. And I think people don't realize that. And quite often I've seen people on the beach that are just using the vertical eye. It doesn't make as much sense, but it's something that I don't think a lot of people know, so if you're going to be casting it out, look for that skimmer type of head. If you're going really shallow, look for that offset eye hook up further towards the front. So you have the weight behind it. So you're pulling it a little more steady. Look for like a bullet head, something like that. You'll get a much better presentation on that. Would you agree with that, or do you have different thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not for nothing, a hook in the water is better than not. But when you can, we have, everything's available to put you on the best tackle possible for the situation. So it's definitely worth it to do a little bit of research and figure out the type of fishing you're going to be doing and match your gear to, what you're going to be doing.
Right. And it's funny. Don Mason, the chat just jumped in. Hey, Don. Don was actually who I was going to go out on the tournament with. So he was going to see all those cheap spros that I was bringing. And actually had, just so people know, Ed made a whole bunch of 3-ounce bucktails for Don and I to test out over the weekend as well. Just didn't happen. Not great weather for offshore, definitely. But yeah, we'll be out in the 90-foot next year. Yeah, so let's go into a big thing about bucktails. Man, we could talk about presentation, and I was kind of thinking let's kind of roll into that, but let's really talk about the construction first, right? So there's different, you can make bucktails a million different ways, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people, and it depends, in my opinion, on the species, right? So to me, the regular generic, like I keep holding these up. These are Captain Hanks right here. These are flounder bucktails. They are not the same as what, and I don't know if people pick up on why, but they're not the same as what you're getting for spro, and they are not the same bucktails that I would use if I'm fishing for striped bass, starting here in a couple of weeks. And there are some reasons for that. So are there any things that you look to do with the different particular bucktails when you're making them for, the customers that really don't ask for anything custom? They just say, hey, I'm fishing for this species. I need some bucktails.
I mean, typically the average, most of my guys that are buying from us are fluke guys. I do have some striper guys and stuff like that. But the average bucktail, I will tie. I can show you this one. This one's a pretty good example. You want to tie it. You want to have fur, all the way around evenly. And, when this stuff gets wet, it's going to streamline down and it's going to mimic a bait fish. That's why, the bucktail, you can throw a bucktail with nothing on it and still catch fish because it emulates, bait fish. So the average bucktails is going to be tied with fur all the way around evenly. And that way, guys, I've seen guys with scissors out on the jetties, trimming them up, cutting hair off. You can play with the sink rate. You can do, you can change the action of the bait. There's a lot you can do with a bucktail. They're very universal and what's the word? Yeah, just universal. They'll catch anything. There's not much in the bay that won't hit on a bucktail.
It's funny. If you go down, everybody has their confidence lure, right? But what's interesting is there are two lures that really haven't changed much over time. There's the spoon, and then there's the bucktail. Mm-hmm. And you could essentially say the same list. Maybe the spoon might have caught more, but I can tell you personally, I have used as a primary lure for flounder, for weakfish, bluefish, striped bass, tuna, mahi-mahi, Spanish mackerel, false albacore. We could, did I say tuna? Sharks. When you see sharks on the top, you throw a bucktail at them. They will mako sharks. I've caught many. I won't even say several, many dozens of mako sharks. Now, this was years ago, back in the 80s, but it was all on bucktails. And
to touch on that, when I started tying the bucktails and learning about them, there's a company that really made them, put them on the map was this Upperman's company, and they were actually in Atlantic City, which is 15 minutes from here. Bucktails were so efficient that the U.S. Navy has them in their survival kits. They started in World War II, and they still have them to this day. For guys that get stranded or whatever, they have a way to catch something.
Yeah, I mean, it's proven. And anybody who's fished multiple species, if you have to go with just one lure, I would always bring the bucktail. I mean, it's huge in Australia. It's huge here. I mean, it's huge all over the world. I think it's some of the best places to go fishing, and the bucktail is there. Now, when you talk about the construction, I guess the thing that really makes it a bucktail is you're using bucktail on there. You have the silicone skirts. They're not actually bucktails. They mimic them somewhat, but they don't have the same action, right? Those large silicone skirts, they have good action, but they don't have the same action. So your basic one is you're going even all the way around it, right? That's your general all-around, all-purpose bucktail then?
Yep. Yeah. All-purpose is going to be hair tied all the way around. You want to keep it even so the action, it doesn't, tend to favor one side or the other. Or, you as the angler will put that action into it, and it won't do it on its own.
Right. And there are a couple things to consider. Let's see. So actually, Eric Cohen is asking thoughts on effectiveness, area timing for a jig head with hair, meaning the bucktail plus gulp versus a plain jig head with just the gulp. Why, when, and where would you use one over the other for fluke? And that's an interesting question. It kind of goes to what I was saying about the different types of bucktails. And the all-around bucktail that you're talking about with the even bucktail on there. Now, this because we've talked at length about it. I don't like that for fluke at all. I think it's too much. You think of the construction of their mouth. I spent years just buying spros and buying other things and then cutting them myself. Like you said, that you see people on the beach doing all the time to shape it to the way that they like it. So look at this one. It's very sparse. It is not even, look, see how his flared out. You want to hold your standard one up there. Look at that.
This one, now, mind you, this one is well used. This was,
right.
This has seen many a fish. So it's a little ratty, but.
It's a little ratty, but this one's brand new. This one actually hasn't hit the water yet. But you can see how sparse it is from the bottom and the top. So it's thinner. It has a thinner profile, which in my opinion and in my experience fits the mouth of the fluke better. Right. They don't have all that hair to go through. They don't have, they have a smaller, their mouth gets big when it's wide open, but when it's closing, you want as much of this hook in that mouth as possible. And I don't want them snipping back here, right? I don't want them grabbing all that. I want this all compact in the water. So it's really nice and streamlined. And I want them grabbing that hook and getting it in their mouth. So that's why I like these. Then we could talk a little bit about, kind of what we're doing together here, and then with a little bit of flash on the side, just for a little bit of color. But to Eric's question, my thought is I would use the plain jig head with the gulp if the bucktail is too big, right? To me, it makes it easier for them to grab. Now, when I would use more bulk, two things. If I'm not using a gulp, because people do fish bucktails without anything, they just put Procure on it or, a squid strip. In that case, I would use a bucktail with feathers to give it a little bit more volume, to make it look a little bit more like a bait fish. But if the water is murky, you want it to move the water, right? You need the vibrations out there so it hits the lateral line so that they can sense that it's there, even if they can't see it. So that's when I'm using like the bigger bucktails, if it's a little bit of murky water. Now, mid-Atlantic and north is pretty much all murky, right? Or it's at least dirty.
Although last year we had a couple really nice days where it looked kind of Caribbean out there.
Yeah, we have had a few of those. Generally speaking, though, especially when you compare it to Florida and North Carolina, which is a lot cleaner, it's a lot clearer. I was down in North Carolina and I'm seeing 8 feet down. I'm literally seeing the bottom. You don't get that up in New Jersey, as an example. New York, it's typically you get about 1.5 feet to 2 feet is pretty good. Right. So you want something that's going to move the water, send the vibrations out, which is why the paddle tail gulps work really well if you're using gulp baits. the jerk shads, because they get a little bit of vibration going out there. The grub tails really get some vibrations out there. That's my answer, though. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's when I would do it. The dirtier the water, the bulkier I'm going. But generally speaking, I want to stay sparse, which is why I like these bucktails that you tied up for me. There's some volume there, but there's not too much. And that to me is the general all-purpose type of bucktail to use for the standard conditions in New Jersey and New York.
I can agree to that. The only other reason I would consider going to a plain jig head and gulp is wreck fishing, like out in the ocean. You don't want to be losing them bucktails $6, $7, $8 a piece, depending on how big they are. Where you can get a pack of jig heads, they're a little bit cheaper. They're still going to work, maybe not as effective, but usually when you find them on a wreck, it's game on no matter what you throw at them. So, but back bay, I very rarely carry anything other than bucktail. I tried doing the Skinner method for a couple years with the teaser on top with a plain jig head. It didn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe I can't figure out how to jig a rod right. But it just never did. Bucktails always produce, always. So that's
they do. And I think it's fun. I give Skinner a lot of credit because he has the Skinner rig, also known as the rig that we all used growing up our entire lives, that our grandparents were using before he was born. But he has made it his own, and I tip my hat to him.
Absolutely.
Bucktails for flounder is not something that came along with John Skinner. I remember, in the 70s fishing with bucktails for fluke. They were a little different than the ones that we use now, but yeah, the Skinner method, I think it's great. I have trouble with it, especially the rapid jigging. I don't have the Popeye forearms. Yeah, I have tennis elbow over here, and I have carpal tunnel over here. So my thumb and my pointer finger, I can't feel. So no, those repetitive things. I'm more of a, just keep it moving type of guy.
Yeah, I try to keep it methodical. I try to feel the bottom. I don't want to like reel it up a foot off the bottom and just bounce the rod. I want to know the contours and get that you want that bait as close to them as possible. I mean, everybody's seen the underwater footage. They'll come up, they'll chase up, but they live on the bottom. Especially when conditions are tough, because I'm sure you've caught flounder that have their bellies are covered in mud. They're laying down there. They're not up in the water column at all. They're right smack on the bottom.
They are. As a matter of fact, and you can catch them top water, but it's got to be really shallow, and they will chase all the way up to the top.
Listen, I'm holding you to a top water trip. All right.
So yeah, I talked about this on a podcast earlier this year, and we were talking about it, and it's really it's the flats next to a pretty decent drop off in the spring when the water's still pretty cold, but you get a nice sunny day, you got a mud flat. They will move right up onto that mud flat and sit on the top there, kind of sunning themselves. And when you pull those things out, they are covered in mud. I mean, it's just stuck to them. And what's funny is it won't even come off if you grab them. The mud is that stuck into their slime that it just stays there.
That's crazy. Yeah, I heard you on the Tide Chasers podcast talking about that. That got me. That piqued my interest. I'm definitely want to get the kayak out and try it. Yeah,
if you have a fly rod and a very small popper, I'm talking small, like a 2-inch popper, it'll work. But it's not something I do for a full day. It was, I was actually practicing when I learned that you could do it. I was practicing casting a fly rod. We've got another question in the chat. John Hutchinson, hooks, what size should be used? Is smaller better than large hook, and the length of the shank? We both have opinions on this. I actually don't know yours, though. So let's hear yours first, and then I'll jump in with my thought on it.
1 second.
Yeah, go ahead, man. A lot of thought.
So hooks, you got to use quality hooks. I've had hooks that I've straightened the shanks on the old Duratin, the silver old Mustad hooks that have been around 100 years. You'll straighten one of them out on a decent fish, no problem. The stuff that we're using with our jigs, we're using the Mustad black nickel hooks. They're forged hook. They're a lot stronger. I mean, I'll snap line before I break a hook, and that's what I would rather. I'd rather that be what happens than a jig failure, because having a jig fail, number one, makes me and the company look bad, and it creates an angry angler. As far as size and length, I try to use the biggest hook we can fit in the molds. So, certain molds will recommend using a 5/0 or a 6/0, and I'll try to step it up. There's molds that we have that I've actually modified with a little angle grinder to get in there and fit a bigger hook, just to use. It's called a Don jig. It's designed for the bigger sluggos and the zoom flukes. It's a 3/8 head, but it has a 7/0 hook, so it's a monster. I prefer a longer shank. This one here is I believe it's on a 5/0 hook. Oh, if I held it up high enough. So you can kind of see where the jig head stops. I should have brought some bare jigs, but you can see where the bait keeper is. So you have a decent amount of hook protruding. And then you also kind of want to match your bait size to your hook as well. If you go with, you put a big giant, 6-inch gulp on here, you're going to have a lot of tail. They're going to be chomping at the tail before they get the hook. I think, Rich, you have some with the bigger hooks. You have the ones with the 7/0s.
Yeah.
And you're going to get hook point contact before you get, more contact with the fur and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and that's why I like them. I'm going to scroll some pictures of you and some of your products and everything so people can see it as we continue to go through here. I personally like now this is my personal preference. And again, I remember I made my own, well over a decade ago, I was making my own and testing them out. And I found that I really do like the longer shank. I tend to use bigger baits. I'm not necessarily looking for the biggest fish possible, but I am looking for the bigger ones. I would much rather catch no fish than 100. Well, no, not no fish. I would much rather catch one big fish and trade off 15 shorts and not catch those. Right. So to me, that's a good day. And I believe that the longer shank allows two things with a fluke specifically. I think it works really well with the shape of their mouth, because fluke do come up and they short strike a lot. They'll see where that fluke is right there. That's actually how it'll grab that hook. It'll grab that bait. It'll kind of grab onto the end and kind of mouth it. Right. And that's why with an artificial, you set it the second you feel it, because it's got it in its mouth, and you got to try to set it right away because it'll spit an artificial. And I feel like the longer shank gives it a better opportunity to actually engulf the hook at the same time that it mouths it the first time. So that's what I'm typically going to do. I'm going to look for the bigger, not necessarily the bigger hook, but the longer shank. But to your point, they're quote unquote just flounder, but you need to make sure you have a strong hook on those, right? Mm-hmm. It has to be a strong hook. So, I love the hooks that you use, the Mustad, the forged hooks. They're great. But that's my thought on it. I personally just prefer the longer shank. I think it fits better. It gets into that mouth a little bit easier because, they don't have to take as much of the bait in order to get the hook pointed into their jaw as they would with those short shanks, which you see on, I'm not going to name the names of all these companies, but there are some that's really all they have are these really short jigs, these really short shanks. And to me, they're worthless.
On that picture you have on the screen now, that's that to the right. Those are those giant ones that I was talking about with that really big 7/0 hook.
Let me go back here.
Yeah, on
this one right here.
Yeah, right there on the right hand side. That's a 3/8 head, and I mean you can see how big that hook is. Yep. They're going to grab that hook before they get anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question. See the other questions. John, I fished with John before. Great guy. He's caught him on a teaser and the single bucktail. Andrew doesn't have as much luck with the Skimmer method. Always the teaser. How about braid versus mono and the impact mono has on keeping in touch with the bottom? Which again, for fluke fishing specifically, that's the key. You got to keep in touch with the bottom. What's your thought on that?
So I use a fluoro leader. Everything I'll tie an Albright, and I'll use probably, the length doesn't really matter. I'll use probably 18 to 20 inches of fluoro. My rods are spooled with 25-pound Power Pro. I might go a little on the heavier side just in case I run into, whatever towed you around the bay the other day. I want to be able to
hooked another one of those yesterday too, by the way.
So I definitely want to have, I want to have the muscle to fight them. So I'm using fluoro. I don't think that really affects your ability to keep, hold bottom. You're depending on the rod. The rod has a lot to do with it too. You want a rod with a sensitive tip, so you feel it all the way through the blank. I just started using Jigging World rods, and so far I'm in love with them. They're very sensitive. You feel a lot. I was using a Fenwick rod before, the HMG Inshore, which is an all-around awesome rod, and I'll never get rid of them. But I think the rod has a lot more to do with you feeling the bottom than your line and your leader combo.
Yeah. I personally, I have switched over to, I use braid on everything. One thing that I do, which is kind of why maybe some people have seen in some of my videos, it happened again yesterday, is I will break off sometimes because I use the lightest braid I can. It's typically 10 or 15 pound braid. It cuts the water. It's very thin compared to mono. And I feel like it helps the lead get down quicker. And then I actually use a 10 to, for 90% of it, I use a 20 pound mono leader. And I'll use anywhere from, depends on if I'm going to put a teaser on there with that dropper loop or not. But I'll use 2 to 3 feet of it, mainly because I tie it on with an FG knot. And when I'm out in a kayak, it's a pain in the neck to tie an FG knot because I steer with my left hand and I don't want to just sit there and drift and tie a knot. I tie when I'm moving to another spot to save time. Like, hey, the channel's all about, more fish and less time, right? So I don't waste a second when I'm out there.
Listen, I'm guilty of breaking off and tying directly to braid. I have no shame.
So I did that actually a couple of weeks ago. Another video I had up was I went down to the Chesapeake with my buddy Randy, and we just wanted to see what was out there. And I didn't retie, and I had about a leader about this long, and I was like, screw it. So I just put a jig head on there and a paddle tail, and we were trolling. I picked up a Spanish mackerel on that. Thank God it didn't bite any. It actually, I hooked it and it came out and ended up hooking it in the head, which I think saved me because, it stayed away from the teeth. But I actually have a video of that, pulling in a Spanish mackerel with 0 leader on it, just straight to braid on 15 pound braid.
If it's stupid and it works, is it stupid?
Exactly. For me, it just saved me time. I didn't have to tie up and head out. But yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is you definitely get more sensitivity out of braid for your main line. You can definitely feel a little bit more in there. But once you introduce that fluoro and that mono leader, you're going to lose a little bit of that. But I use the braid to get it down to the bottom. I think it helps to hold it a little bit better than mono. So that's just my personal opinion. With that said, I've caught thousands of fish on mono, main line, and fluoro leaders. I've even caught a lot of flounder on wire leaders when I was really young. I would just take whatever was pre-tied and I just grab wire leaders. So it can all still work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Andrew is also asking, what's the difference between the hair and the silicone, and when would you use them?
I think the hair and silicone is going to be more of a personal preference type thing. I prefer, I'm a bucktail guy through and through. We do offer silicone skirts for things. I haven't really fished with them too often. I should probably give it a better shot, but I'm just stuck on the bucktails. You're going to get action no matter what, but I feel like the bucktail and the way it's tied versus the way a skirt's tied, it moves more water and it creates more, like you were saying, it creates more sensation on that lateral line, and it gets, it emulates a real bait fish, whereas kind of the silicone's just a little all over the place and kind of a little like it doesn't have as much density as a bucktail.
Yeah, I would agree. Now I say this as somebody who has used silicone extensively. Last season, not this one that just ended yesterday, but the last year in 2020, I used it almost exclusively, and I had a great year. Out of the two, I prefer the bucktail in nearly every situation. And quite frankly, the only time, given a choice between the two, that I would use the silicone is when there are more toothy critters in the area. So if I'm going through bluefish, or if there are, it's really bluefish. If there's a lot of bluefish in the area, I will definitely use the silicone because I think it holds up a little bit better. You're more likely to not have it get caught in the teeth and twisted out of the bucktail. So it doesn't ruin it, right? So that's more of a durability thing for me. But head to head, my personal preference has been, and I think will always be, to have an actual real bucktail versus a silicone in the vast majority of things. Now, if you go offshore, I wouldn't necessarily say that's true, right? The bigger you get, the more silicone becomes, to me, a viable option, right? So if you're out there for tuna and you're going to use a big bucktail, you're talking like a 4 ounce that you're really just hauling out there on a huge spinning gear. I would actually go with the silicone there. I think it holds up really well, and it works really well for getting the bait on the hook. One bad thing about bucktails versus silicone is if you ever try to take a gulp off or a soft plastic with the bucktail, you have to know how to take it off. Otherwise, you're going to rip the fur right out.
Yeah, the fur gets caught up under the hook barb. And then when you take the gulp, it takes it.
Yeah, so
with it.
Yeah, this is a little pro tip for everyone. So when you have a gulp on there or a soft plastic coming off of here, make sure before you take it off, just grab it all and just pull it out of the way. So you're pulling it off on a bare hook. Otherwise, it'll start to pull all the hair off, and you're going to end up losing a whole bunch of the top of the jig. So imagine doing that when you've got a big, 9-inch plastic on something offshore that you're trolling or you're tossing out at mahi or tuna or something like that. Or sharks. Sharks, you'll sometimes throw a bucktail with a big half mackerel or a big mackerel on it. I would use silicone for that. So hopefully that helps, Andrew. That's my opinion on it. Yeah. So let's go into a little bit about presentation. What are some of the things that you think about when you're making a jig with the presentation and that you consider before tying it up?
I mean, it really depends on what the order is, what the customer's, looking for. Most people give me, a little heads up on what they're doing, and then we'll tie something, to whatever they want. Every jig is different. There's no two that are the same. There's no two deer that are the same. Even sections of hair on one tail are different. So it's one of those things that you have to balance, the hair that you're using, the hair that you're putting on, and the way you're putting it on and tying it, just to make sure that everything stays together. Because let's face it, it's hair. We're cutting hair off a tail and tying it on. So you want it as strong as possible. You want it to stay together.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. When we met up fishing a few weeks ago, and we went back to your shop, and you were showing me the differences between, off the same tail, you were showing me the difference between the hair pulled from one section versus the other. And then you tied up the one jig right there. And it was interesting. It was interesting to me. And there you go. That's it.
That's the prototype there.
Yeah. That's the prototype that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. What's your thought on using things like the flash taboo, the tinsel, hackles, that type of thing?
It's all dependent again on what you're doing. So my go-to this year was this guy I already showed. There's no flash in there at all. Dirty water conditions, you might want to add some flash. That way it reflects a little bit of light and grabs the attention better. A lot of lures are going to catch more anglers than fish.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's just a reality of our, of our hobby here.
Capitalism.
Yeah, you got to do it. So it all depends. It really depends on what the customer wants and what they're comfortable with using in their style. You said when you ordered those jigs that you have, you wanted some flash, so I threw some in there. But like this one, this is a new color I'm playing with. Well, I'll be playing with for next year, but there's no flash in here. I don't prefer flash. Again, it's all dependent. That's what I like about doing this is you can make them to what people want instead of just settling for something off the shelf that anybody can have.
Right.
Or you can.
I think it's interesting, when you look at the colors and everything. One thing that I've that I think has been beneficial. Well, two things when you talk about color, the use of glow paints, I think have helped. There have been I can tell you this, this year I was out fishing with a guy. I didn't have any glow bucktail heads or jig heads. He did. And I caught nothing. It was I think I got skunked twice this year. And that was one of them. He didn't. He was catching them. I didn't. The other thing is interesting to me, and I'm going to put this back up real quick. Matching the colors to the gulp. So here's New Penny. New Penny to me is one of the most underrated colors that you can get of gulp, and I love the fact that you have the jig heads that are going to match that. So it's more of a seamless type of presentation than what we normally do, which, let's say right here I've got the pink and the white, and then I'm going to throw New Penny on there. Well, I'm just introducing all these crazy colors to it. I'm going to throw chartreuse on there. Well, maybe I should do this with chartreuse, with a little bit of the green in there. So I think that's interesting. So are you looking at matching more of the colors of the gulp as you go forward?
Yeah, we do have, if you check out the Instagram, there should be photos of, we have the full line. Like we can match pretty much every gulp color, blue fuse, the red, nuclear chicken, New Penny,
the salmon red.
Yeah, the salmon. There's just so many colors. Like we have them all. We can match, whatever you're looking to do. We can put something together.
Yeah, I think it's something worth doing and worth trying out, and we'll have some more conversations about that.
Hey, if anything, you're gonna look cool. So
yeah, exactly. Hey, sometimes you got to buy the cool thing, right? Like nobody needs a $400 reel for, kayak fishing as an example, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get one if you can afford it. You got to look good out there too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Looking good's half the part.
Yeah, yeah. You got all the people fishing off of a pier, using their van stalls, and their $1,000 rods.
I had I lost one. He lost one over the side. A bird flew in his line and pulled the whole shebang right over. $1,400 setup gone.
That's no good.
That's not the first time it happened to him either. I felt so bad.
Yeah, you got to feel bad. I mean, that's just disappointing. I've lost some gear, but as people have seen in my other videos, because I kayak fish, I tend to go on the cheap side. So I get the decent rod and the budget reels, and they seem to work out pretty well. And I have a few rigs on the bottom of the Raritan Bay right now. They're about 6 months old now. So maybe somebody can pull one out.
Nice and muddy.
And by this point, dead, totally dead. Let me ask you, personally, how do you choose the colors that you're going to use when you're packing up your tackle box to head out? Because you have, unlike all of us, you have everything just sitting in your shop. So I mean, you pretty much have the world open to you for jigs and bucktails. So how do you choose?
Well, it's funny because our last fishing trip, I took one bucktail with me. If you go through my tackle box, it's pretty sparse.
I was pretty disappointed when you said that too, by the way.
As far as colors go, chartreuse has always been my power color. Now, I have guys that will order, they're all about the pink shine. So they'll do pink, the pink and white. That's their power color. So actually in the slideshow you were showing, there was one picture of a fluke with a minnow head and a blue and yellow somewhere in there, with the blue and yellow in its mouth. And that was the first one I ever tied of that color. And then there you go, that one. That was the last fish of last year that we caught, end of the season. So going into this year, I'm like, there's something about this color I just want to explore it. So that's what I loaded my box with. And then I started changing things up. I started matching, I don't know if you can see, but the head is chartreuse with a blue, splashes in it. And this was just my power color for this year. I decided that's what I was going to use, and it worked. So
yeah, I think one thing people should keep in mind. So again, there's nothing wrong if you use Spro or use another brand. But there's something, to me, it's a whole different thing when you can start experimenting and you can actually say, hey, here's what I would like to have made. Like what we have done And you get that, and then you get to test your own theories. You get to put in the time to figure out, what if I change this? What if I change that? And then from that point on, you have your personalized bucktails to go with. And I love the fact that on your research trip, your first check on this new color, you pulled in that big guy there. That's got to feel good.
Yeah, that was a good trip. But I have my partner that I started the business with. We're still very good friends. There's stuff he tries. There's a guy with the sheep's head that you have in the slideshow. That's Mike.
That's a nice sheep's head.
He was fishing the prototype for the new hook and caught that sheep's head, on our tog jig. So it's definitely not just me behind this. There's a group of people. The Don jig is named after a buddy Don. He's like, hey, can you do something like this? So we did it. It's not. So don't assume it's just me behind all this. There's input from a lot of people that that are very skilled fishermen. So I can't take full credit on research and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to your customers, you listen to the people that come and say, hey, look, I have this idea, let's give it a shot. And then they do come back to you and tell you how it goes, right? Like people ask me, can you help me find a spot in this area? And I tell them, as a matter of fact, I did it tonight with somebody. He's heading down to North Carolina to an area that I fish. I said, I will send you everything that I can. The only thing you have to agree to is you need to tell me how you do. And they'll tell you. And then that's good feedback for me too, right? So now I don't have to fish there. But I'm going to look at it for over the next 2 weeks. What areas would I look at based on the weather trends that are out there? And I'm going to get that feedback, right? So similar to how you get the feedback from every angler that goes out with your gear. It's important, right? It's important because you can learn even if you're not the one on the water.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we always ask for everybody to send us pictures. We try to post as much, photos just to give guys shout outs for, even just supporting us. I mean, we're just a shop in my backyard, and to go up against the big guys and stuff, it's nice to get people involved in it because they have a sense of ownership. If they come up with something that they like and it works, I was the vehicle to get it to them, but it was their idea,
Right.
So that's really cool.
One more question: is color more important than action? I'm going to throw in ahead of time and say no, but Ed, really, I think they're asking you, so you want to chime in on that one?
I'm going to throw a kicker in, and I keep going back to the water clarity. I think if clearer water, maybe darker colors are going to produce clear, it really depends. Clarity is number one. But number two, something I learned actually just this year, and it never really clicked in my head until someone actually said it. Now, we all subconsciously do it, but it clicked. In saltwater, everything is always moving. Whether it's going with the tide, against the tide, moving around. Saltwater, bait and fish are always moving. Freshwater, bass and some of the other fish, they're just hanging out. They're watching what's going on. They're not searching for food. So I think when it comes to color versus action, I'm definitely going to go for action because they're, like I said, saltwater fish are looking to eat. That's all they're looking to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's because what I have seen is that think about artificials. You can throw out a pink shine artificial, and if it's not moving, you're probably not going to get the bite. But the second you put the action behind that, you are going to get the bites. You can throw out a pink shine, and I've done that. I do actually do this a lot. If I am fishing a teaser or top and bottom, I'll put on the bottom a grub usually, and then I'll put shrimp up top. So let's say I'm throwing new penny grub and a new penny shrimp up top. The grub has the action, and I find that I'm getting more on the grub. So I think you'll see it even if you have the same colors on. Generally, the better action is going to outfish it. That's just my opinion. I can't prove it, but I like your thoughts on that as well. Everything's moving. They're used to seeing things moving, and it needs to be something that's going to catch their attention. Maybe color can, but man, if you have the right action, you can get that reaction strike too, which is, especially with these ambush predators like a flounder, you can absolutely get it. So I'm gonna vote also for action. So let's go into the tog. Oh, actually, here's a question. So
Sure.
it's at the very beginning, and it's just being reminded in the chat here, talk about the tog jigs. You also do the tog jigs, but the question was, how does the dirty diaper color work?
Well, the funny part about that is the dirty diaper works very well.
Yeah.
Again, a joke. We try to keep stuff fun, and actually, the guy that's asking about that is Justin. He's the one that started the business with me. Just trying to be a wise guy. But again, in your slideshow, there's a tog. It came in at 6 pounds, and that was the test on the dirty diaper. We had went offshore to the Rex and AC, and that one, I was able to make contact with that one, and that was the first fish caught on the dirty diaper. So, needless to say,
I had a picture of it. It's an interesting color.
It's I don't have any with me.
It's the white. What is it? White with some gold fleck in there.
It's white with a green, really dark, like olive, almost like a, for lack of a better term, it looks like a dirty diaper, and it has some red fleck in it too. So I don't know. It's just one of those off the wall ideas that, we threw something at the wall and it stuck. That's one of the many things that we're playing with. Colors for tog jigs, I think are where it's at.
Yeah, I would. Well, I got to say this. We went out and first drop on the tog jig that you gave me, and I ended up pulling up a keeper. First drop of the year for me. First keeper size. Threw it back, but it was the first keeper size. And I do have to admit, you were kind enough to give me a bunch after that. I lost them all yesterday.
You lost them too?
I lost them too.
Oh, man.
I was trying. I caught a lot of tog. They were all shorts, but yeah, and the worst thing was the one that was really working for me. I don't even know what the color's called. It was like a black with some, maybe it was like a silver color in there as well, if I remember correctly. But I was getting hits on
that's the dirty diaper there.
Okay, I was getting hits on that every drop, and wouldn't you know, there was a rope about 3 feet underwater, and it got hooked into the rope. So I couldn't. There was no way, in a kayak, I couldn't reach down. I couldn't do anything. In that current right next to a bridge, it was a little dangerous. So I had to, give it the salute, say thank you, and cut the line as close as I could. But I ended up losing that. Yeah, disappointing.
Well, the best part is they make more every day, so we can set you up.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it. All right, so I wanted to say one more thing. Going back to some of the things that we were talking about, the fluke jigs that I've been showing, with the thinner profile from the bottom and the top, and you have the bulk on the side. We've kind of teamed up on these, and we'll be making these available to everybody. These again are the design that I've used over the years when I was tying myself. These are much better. These are much better than what I could tie, to be completely honest. And most of what I did was actually just buying some and then just cutting it down. So yeah, I mean, flounder season is over as of yesterday in New Jersey. Now Delaware, it's open all year. I don't know what Maryland is, Virginia. I don't know when New York ends. I think New York closed as well. I'm not 100%, but yeah, we're going to be working together on getting some of those out there for people to use next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I just got to figure out, distribution and stuff like that, but we'll get it together. And I think it's going to definitely up a lot of games for some people, and, get them on something quality that, is going to last them multiple fish, other than don't get snagged and don't lose them. But if they stay on, they're going to last a while. So,
but I did hook another shark yesterday with them. So frustrating. I mean, it ripped off. What I did is I had actually a mullet on the bucktail, and I was jigging it, and I put it down in the rod holder for a second, and it just took off. And I took it out of the rod holder, and it was obviously a shark, and it bit it. It's clean slice right through the jig didn't fail, but the leader failed. So that was actually my first jig that I lost yesterday, and it was downhill from there. So yeah, so guys, we're gonna work together to make some of these. If you're interested in using the same ones that I'm using in the bucktail, Captain Hanks is going to be producing these, and they're going to be made available to everybody. I can tell you, because of the way that it's shaped, because of the types of hooks that Ed uses, man, these are exactly what you want for fluke, especially the inshore. This is one of the smaller ones. It's the right hook. It's the right angle. It's got the right bulk. It's got the right profile from underneath. It's thinner, like a minnow that's swimming by, or anything that would be swimming over top of it. And then it's got the thick profile from the side. If you've ever watched a flounder, it'll go from side to side behind it. It'll see it from the side. It first sees it from the bottom, then it sees it from the side, and then it comes up from underneath and grabs it over top. So these with the ball jig and that profile work really well. Those will be made available. Coming up, we got plenty of time there to work out all the details on that. And actually, we won't talk about it now, but I've got another idea of something that I think will be incredibly successful that we need to do some testing on over the winter. So I fish all year, so I'm happy to do the testing.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get together on that for sure.
Yeah. So let's see other things. Choosing bucktails for striped bass. Andrew, I'll just say real quick, I use the bulkier bucktails, right? So the thick all the way around hackles on there for me personally. If you're going to have somebody tie it for you, some feathers in there definitely help to really bulk it out. Stripers have huge mouths and they inhale, right? They're not just going up and biting. They're inhaling all that water and they're sucking everything in. So you want something with some bulk. You want something that's going to stand up to those bigger artificial baits that you put on there. I mean, some people are throwing 9-inch eels on those. So that's what I would personally do. And I would use something, if you're not vertical jigging, something that has, unlike the picture up right there with the minnow heads, I would have something with the eye hook a little bit further forward so that you get a little bit more of a straight retrieve when you're pulling it in.
Yep. And the only other thing I can add to that is you definitely want bulk because it also controls your sink rate too. Like we were talking before about the different parts of the hair. Lower on the bucktail itself, that hair is actually hollow, so it'll flare more. It'll put out more water. So you want something typically with those striper style jigs. I'll tie the lower hair, the hollow hair on the bottom, and then I'll go around again on top with regular hair to flare it out, so it keeps that bulk.
See, that's awesome. I don't think Spro's doing that. You think they are?
Not.
Maybe they are. I don't know. My guess is probably not. My guess is they probably are. For all I know, they're using artificial bucktail at this point. I don't know. Again, I do have Spro in my box. I do use it when I'm sure I'm going to lose a lure or I'm just sick of losing lures. But yeah, don't want to badmouth other things, but I've talked to a lot of people and I've never had anyone show me the difference between the hair while making a jig in front of me and say, this is why I'm using this. Feel this one, showing me the differences between them. So definitely appreciated that when we were going through.
Absolutely.
So before we go, so did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I mean, bucktails listen, if I can do it, anyone can do it. If you're interested in learning on your own, grab some jig heads, grab some deer hair and try it. If you want something that's going to stand up and last, it's fun to do. I enjoy it. So.
It is, but I will also caution people. There is a difference. I know how to do them. I know how to tie flies too. There is a difference between what I do and what you do. I mean, it's not the same. I on my Instagram, I have a picture of a Spro bucktail. Take a look at that and then compare it to these, comparing it to yours. There's a difference. One has paint after using it a couple times or a full season. And the other one is like the one on my Instagram, the Spro. It's just all lead at that point. So, I mean, you can do it. It can be fun, but there's a difference.
I can't give away all the secrets.
No.
I'm going to encourage people to enjoy themselves and have fun, but I'm not going to give away all the secrets. Come on.
Yeah. And I just like, I can make a rod, but I don't make rods anymore. I don't make my own tackle anymore. I go to people that are better at it, who enjoy doing it and have a passion for it, because that comes through in the end result, unlike mine, which are typically tied as quickly as possible, or the rods are put together as quickly as possible just so I can get it out on the water the next weekend. So, all right. So before we go, real quick, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you and Captain Hanks?
Yeah. So currently we're on Instagram and Facebook, and that's where the majority of our transactions are going on. We're working on a website. Like I said earlier, we kind of started this during COVID time, so we weren't coming out guns blazing. We were just trying to be the sneaky guy coming in. So now things are starting to get take off. So we're gonna do website and all that stuff down the road. But like I said, Facebook, Instagram is Captain Hank's Tackle. I have my personal fishing page is SJ Saltfish. On Instagram, I post up a lot of catches and a lot of jigs that I'm using and what I'm using, and you'll see in 90% of the photos is going to be this guy here. It's fun, man. I enjoy it. I love it. It's life.
That's awesome. Well, so guys, you know where to check them out. One real quick question: do you make any ball jigs with the rattle?
I do not produce them. The only ones I've really seen maybe work are for freshwater, and even in our local waters, most jigs, there's not. They more imitate crawfish and stuff like that. We don't have them here. So, as far as for saltwater, I don't think the rattle is gonna. I think it's just fluff, to be honest.
Yeah, I've used it. I haven't noticed a difference, which doesn't mean that I wouldn't try it again. I haven't noticed a positive or a negative in saltwater. I also do not remember. I don't remember the brand, to be honest with you. But I did try it. I didn't notice anything. But something to think about. Maybe it's something we could try out next year.
Yeah, I'm not against trying new stuff.
Yeah.
I do think the rattle might be better suited for some top water, just to make a little more noise on the surface.
Yeah.
But underwater, I don't know that it's gonna really do too much, but never know.
Well, maybe we can try it when we go for top water fluke next summer or next spring.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be fun. All right, guys. Well, thank you, everybody. For those that are on the live stream, thanks for coming in. Thanks for the comments and everything. A like really helps the video once it's posted after this for everyone to find. So any likes, if you found any value, would definitely be appreciated. We're going to have another live stream coming up in a couple of weeks. The topic to be announced later. I'm working on getting a couple of people together for that. So again, thanks everyone for stopping by. Ed, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Everybody,
Absolutely.
catch you in the next one. Tight lines.